Okay, well, this afternoon we're going to explore spaces of memory. And we've got a very, I think, quite experimental, eclectic, wide-ranging set of presentations this afternoon to explore this, this field. And I just wanted to say a few words by way of introducing, in particular, what we understand by space and how memory might fold into this. Now, space is often considered to be natural, something that just happens to be around us. And it's pre-existent, and we just shape it. But there's another way of thinking about space, which I think has quite a lot of currency today, which is particularly following the ideas of the French philosopher Henri Lefebvre, to think about space as a social construct, as something which is man-made, made by men and women, historically. The idea that space is a historical product, and that we make space, and that space makes us. And this is sometimes referred to as the social spatial dialectic. Can I move this on, Greg? How do I do that? Okay. Yeah, please, thank you. Lefebvre thinks about space as being constructed through three different components, which you can see on the screen here. These all happen to be New York. The first one he talks about is something called spatial practices, which essentially means the material, physical things around us. So this kind of hard stuff, the room we're in, buildings, airports, houses, roads, lampposts, furniture, our bodies, physical bodies. So that perhaps, and then obviously the kind of the space in between all those things. But then Lefebvre also says, well, but actually we have mental conceptions of space, what he calls spaces of, representations of space, the middle image, maps, diagrams, mathematical descriptions of space, the idea, the word room, the idea of a room, the idea of space that we might have. And this is very conscious and codified and deliberate. And then Lefebvre says, well, but then there's also a third kind of space, which is the space that we experience and that we imagine and that we perhaps don't always consciously think about, but which we nonetheless imagine through our kind of everyday lives. And Lefebvre also has this concept of everyday life and normalcy. So the experience of in this case, very rainy New York street, walking down it. And then, interestingly, actually space is produced by all of these three things together. Can we have the next slide? So that actually space is produced not just from buildings, not just from maps and diagrams, not just from everyday experiences or imaginations, but all three things together. So this means that space is constantly unfolding, constantly being reproduced, constantly being remade, and it's dynamic and uncertain and provisional. Next one, please. So this is where memory comes in. Because if you think about, well, if space is about objects and practices, and it's about ideas, and it's about imaginations, then memory surely is one of the ways in which these three kind of spatial productions are glued and scrambled and rethought together. Memory, which is our ability to store and retain data, is one of the ways that we bring these different spatial constructions together. And also memory has different temporalities. It can be short-term or long-term or historic or eternal. And it also has different kinds of recall or different kinds of consciousness. So when we start to think about the complexity of memory and the complexity of the production of space, we realise that we're entering some pretty murky territory. And this is the territory we're going to have a little explore into this afternoon. Next one, please. Now, we've got 7 different speakers this afternoon. You've got a handout, a sheet, which explains who everyone is. So I'm not going to go into detail about explaining who everyone is right now. But just to say that I think we're going to explore, on one hand, a whole series of different kind of purposes of memory. So we're going to look at remembrance and memorialisation and historical memory and collective memory and personal memory and fragmented memory, and also to some extent about memory as forgetting, this idea that we might remember on one hand so that other times we can forget. Next slide, please, Greg. And then also we're going to look at different kinds of objects and different kinds of practices. So we're going to look at books, we're going to look at literature, we're going to look at photographs, we're going to look at cemeteries, we're going to look at film, we're going to look at photographs, we're going to listen to some things, and at one point this afternoon I think we're going to be blindfolded and just experience some memory that way. So we're going to explore this all through different kinds of process as well as through different kinds of objects. And last one, please. So back to where we started, this thing that we think of as space, as I say, is artificial, but it's also therefore intensely human. And I think there's no other process that is more psychological process that is more human than our act of memory. So I think we're in for a fascinating afternoon. We're going to start with my colleague from UCL, Greg Dart, who's from the English department, and he's going to help us explore this first of all through notions of literature. So welcome, Greg. Over to Greg.